Hi everybody, I'm Patrick.
And I'm Michael. You're watching another episode of Star Wars News and Views. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be taking a look at the influence that Star Wars has had on various movies, comic book, games, any sort of medium.
Yep.
This is going to be an ongoing series. I'm not sure how often we're going to do this, but there's so much to talk about. Star Wars has influenced so many things. So today, to kick this off, me and Patrick, we're both going to pick one media, one release that has been shaped and influenced by Star Wars. So in other words, if Star Wars had never come out, this product would not exist, this story would not exist the way it does.
Yeah. So I'll take it from here, starting off with the video game, Final Fantasy XII. Now, the Final Fantasy series is pretty well known. It's a Japanese role-playing game series. They've been releasing games since like 1989, I think was the first one came out.
Something like that.
And they've been released on various platforms. Final Fantasy XII specifically was released on PlayStation 2. And also the story itself, it's set in a world called Ivalice. Ivalice is this like planet. It's just like one entire planet, but it's sort of in a medieval time. There's magic and swords and there's like sky ships and stuff. So it's kind of like that whole fantasy aspect going on.
Fantasy meets sci-fi.
Yeah.
Sci-fantasy.
Sci-fantasy, yeah, with this like steampunk. So the actual story itself is very similar to Star Wars. The main character, Vaughn, is a orphan who lives in this desert kingdom that's like a small, more like reclusive one called Damascus, which is very similar to like how Luke starts off in Tatooine as an orphan and just lives with his aunt and uncle. There's an Arcadian empire that's sort of slowly taking over every kingdom, and a lot of these kingdoms are smaller, starting to like start like a little rebellion, right? Working together. He ends up meeting a princess named Ash. She starts off in hiding. You don't know that she's a princess, just like when Luke meets Leia. Another character that's playable you get to see is this like disgraced knight named Bosch. He's in hiding and everything because he had done something terrible, but in the same sense he's very similar to Obi-Wan in that he's a knight in hiding.
He's been outcast and stuff like that.
In this order, and he sort of trains Vaughn a little bit, sort of how like Obi-Wan trains Luke. Another character, these characters that I'm listing by the way are all playable characters, the ones that you get in your main party. The other two characters, there's Balthier and Fran. Balthier is a sky pirate. He flies around the sky with his partner, Fran. He's sort of like a witty character, very similar to Han Solo. And he's got a partner, Fran, who's this like Vera. It's sort of like a bunny creature thing.
A furry thing.
Yeah, it's like an animal, kind of like Chewbacca, except in this one they're in love, but there's no, I don't know, maybe there's some Han Solo Chewbacca fan fiction.
Oh, God.
Another thing is the main antagonist is this Emperor Gramus. He's the leader of the Empire, and he has a sort of elite task force called the Judge Magisters, and they're all fully clad in armor. They've got like magical powers, and they're like really powerful. And he has them to command as his like right hand organization that does whatever he says, including stuff that they don't tell the public. It's sort of like hidden.
Kind of like the Sith.
I guess. Kind of like the Sith. And the main one is Gabrinth. He's pretty much like Darth Vader. He starts off as this like stoic, not really talking, like evil character. You find out he has ties to Bosch in some sense, sort of like how Darth Vader ties to Obi-Wan. And at some point he tries to get Ash to join the dark side. Not really, Vaughn, but sort of like get Ash to defect from the rebels and join him and help him in their like quest. And in the end, he sort of has his redeeming factor where he fights the Emperor. It's very similar to Star Wars in that sense. Yeah, and it takes those tropes. That being said, it's a good game. It's got a great story, and I think that because it's influenced by it, it doesn't necessarily mean that like they kind of stole a lot of it, but it doesn't really seem like it. It's not just like, oh, this is a Star Wars ripoff. It's its own and a very good.
It's more influenced of it, just the same way that Star Wars is influenced by like The Hidden Fortress by Akira Kurosawa.
Yeah,
but it's not really a ripoff of it.
Yeah. Another cool thing to note about this Final Fantasy XII Star Wars connection is Star Wars, like you had said, is heavily influenced by The Fortress and all these Akira Kurosawa Japanese films. And then this was like a Western version of that storytelling. And now going back to Japan, Final Fantasy XII has come full circle, is now referencing the Western thing.
So the circle is complete.
Yeah, giving and taking. It's cool.
So my first pick for Star Wars influenced films came out in 1984, 1 year after Return of the Jedi came out, at sort of the height of the Star Wars craze. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, they don't really try to hide the fact that it's a Star Wars ripoff. Sounds like I'm criticizing it. I mean that in the best of ways. The Last Starfighter.
which Mike and I actually rewatched recently too. It's got its moments. It's a good movie.
It's a really good 80s sci-fi, sort of cheesy 80s sci-fi movie. In the 1980s, there was like this renaissance of fantasy and science fiction. You had stuff like heavy metal and Conan the Barbarian, Star Wars, Aliens, the Black Hole, Star Trek the movies, The Last Starfighter, Beastmaster even, all these, Highlander, all these amazing, probably kids now look back at them and think they're cheesy, and yes, they are cheesy. They're very 80s. But this was a movie that I grew up in the late 80s, and I watched this a lot, and so I have a lot of nostalgia for it. But there's a lot of movies I watched as a kid that I'll go back and see them later, and I'm like, oh, they're actually kind of crappy.
Yeah, well, you see all these tropes that are repeated, like pale blue lights for like sci-fi movies in the 80s.
Yeah, and so it does have some of those 80s tropes, but it's actually made with a lot of heart, and it's actually very good. And the movie concerns a young man who is 18 or 19, even though he's played by a guy that's clearly not a teenager. It's like Beverly Hills, where they're like 26 years old, and they're
Luke Perry is like 30 or something.
They're supposed to be in high school. So it's about a high school student. He's in his final year of high school. He's in this trailer park. He's in this desolate trailer park in the desert, in the middle of nowhere, and he has a small group of friends, but he dreams of greater things and going off into the world and going to college in the big city. And he lives, his parents are very... they care for him, but they're like, Alex, we need you to fix this thing on the farm over here.
Yeah,
and he's
they
like,
care for him, but they need him too, and they want him to.
They want him to stay on the park because they're the maintenance crew for the park. So it's very similar to Luke wanting to leave the farm, but his aunt and uncle need him. It's like, well, you can go to the academy next year. It's like, you can go to college next year.
Yeah.
It's kind of complicated. He ends up playing this video game called The Last Starfighter, and it's actually based on the Atari arcade game of Star Wars, which was one of the best old school arcade games. It's made with vector graphics. The one in the movie uses vector graphics, like wireframe graphics, and he beats the high score in the game. And it turns out that elsewhere in the galaxy, there's this whole war between a rebellion and an empire that is going on, and they've placed these arcade games. It was never supposed to come to Earth. It was supposed to go to some other planet, but they use these games to recruit people. So basically, if you're good enough to beat the game, it's like a simulator, right? So we can train you to be a pilot. So he gets involved in this rebellion against this empire and becomes this fighter pilot. Anyway, though, so it's basically essentially a Star Wars ripoff. But one thing that's noteworthy about this movie is for the spaceship, there's a lot of spaceship battles. If you like sort of dogfights, that sort of Star Warsy, spaceships shooting each other, and there's the flagship of the Empire, which is like a Star Destroyer. There's all that stuff. It actually takes a little bit of influence from Battlestar Galactica as well, which was this sort of actual Star Wars ripoff in the late 70s. But the special effects are all done with CG. This is a movie in 1984 where the special effects are all computer generated. You can tell today, it looks like a PS1 game at best, really, like literally. But it kind of, in a way, it holds up. I don't know. I guess it's done with such sincerity, and the way it's integrated in, the movie is so dated that you kind of accept that this unrealistic looking part of it, you just kind of go with it. The same with when you watch King Kong. King Kong is an amazing movie, but it's obviously stop motion, right? You just kind of accept that this dated aspect of the movie, and it all kind of coheres together because of that. It's all from the 80s. But the score is amazing. The score has that really sort of John Williams-y score. It's just if you like 1980s science fiction fantasy films, this is one of the best. The budget's pretty impressive. Production design is done by Ron Cobb, who did Alien and Star Wars. So it has that kind of iconic look. It's just that it's not, instead of having like a $30 million budget like Return of the Jedi did, it had maybe like an $18 million budget.
It also seemed like a little bit more geared towards like younger generation because it was about high school, like a high school
student.
It is,
yes. So I guess those are our picks for the first episode of our Star Wars influences episode.
Let us know what you guys think about if that was a good description of them. If you have any ones that you think are really Star Wars influenced.
If you have any suggestions for things we should check out. And if you haven't played Final Fantasy XII and if you haven't seen The Last Starfighter, maybe this is a good time to sort of get familiar with them because they're both very quality games and movies. They're very good.
I Final Fantasy 12 might even get a re-release soon, like an HD one. That'd be a good time to play it. It's long, and if you kind of have to like the genre to do it, but it's a really good one, and it's got written highly. So.
Final Fantasy games, unfortunately, they're like 100-hour games.
You can probably, I think my playtime for that one was like 50 hours. Although there's some stupid like boss in that game where you have to fight it for like 24 hours. It's like it's an optional boss that you don't actually fight in real life, but you like just leave the console on.
Who does that?
I know.
The good news is the last Starfighter is just over 90 minutes. So if you have 2 hours to kill, go check it out. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and see you next episode.